So what do I mean by this would be a good start? So it's really a talk about design ethics and our responsibility to the people that we design for and the world that we live in as designers. So I'm Hollie. I basically started being interested in ethics and society and how the world is affected by tech probably back in the first days of my career. My dissertation was looking at design psychology and actually semiotics and how we read images. And kind of from there, I got this feeling that, you know, we can really affect people. We have this amazing, wonderful skill that we get to use, and we help people interpret the world. So actually, what does that mean for us? So that's why I think it's really important that we start talking about the ethics of our work. And ethics is not really a glamorous topic. It's one of those ones that sounds a bit kind of, you know, you should do better, we should all do better, we kind of know it, but this is really about why do we need to do it now? Why is it important with kind of the technological advances that we've got? And actually, we do have a responsibility as designers, and I genuinely do believe that. I think this is true probably more than anything else, is that as people who design menus, we do control the options that are available to people. And I think quite often when you're doing it, you don't necessarily look at it in that way. You're trying to make it the best possible for people, but you don't necessarily look at the choices that they actually can't make afterwards because of that choice that you made. So, dark patterns is probably the easiest example of where things have gone wrong. I don't think that people necessarily have done these because, well, this is obviously an easy target to pick on as well, but I don't think it happens necessarily because people wanted to do it. But we're moving kind of into this space where we do a lot of, we use, at least in sort of the companies that I've been in, we start looking at behavioural psychology and actually how we use behavioural science and those little tricks that we shortcut in our mind to design things in a way that we want to get people to do what we want. And actually sometimes I think it's just that we haven't noticed or didn't really necessarily think about it. And the more and more that we use things like this, where we use these tricks that we know are there in those little shortcuts, the more actually we need to consider the flip side of it and what's going on for the people that that doesn't work out so well for. And really, it's about system design at the end of the day and what you can and can't do within a system, whether that's a huge product, a tiny product, or just kind of a small website. Actually, what we can and can't do is a decision that tends to come down to the design team and the product team. So for me, that's why when I think about design, it's a practice. It's something that we do, it's very practical, but actually each decision that we make is practical ethics. And each choice that we're making is an ethical choice and a decision about what is right and what is wrong, which can be easy, which can be hard. And I think particularly quite often, you know, I think it was really good when Johnny showed all the different jobs that he's had, because I think we've all probably moved through different job titles, but now I probably associate most closely with user experience designer. And in that title, we have this thing where we're like saying, you know, we're going to advocate for people, we're here for people. But actually, are we there for everyone? Because we do this thing where we're like very tailored about who we're targeting and trying to actually get them to do things. And it just makes me kind of stop and consider for a minute, actually, what is ethical design? And is it just design that's made with an intent to do good? And therefore, what is good and what is bad? Or is it just that it's design where people have spent the time to consider the implications they could have, rather than kind of rush through and, you know, we've all got deadlines. So I'm sure we've all kind of rushed something out the door that necessarily wasn't as good as it could have been, but maybe we didn't think about the effect that that had later on down the line. And when we look at this sort of world that we're living in at the moment, which I think is super exciting, and I'm not anti-tech, and I really like the way that we're going, and I'm really interested in sort of these new advances that we have, but actually we're kind of spinning faster and faster, and these amazing technologies that we've got are helping us reach more people more quickly, more tailored, more advanced, and we're actually able to kind of contact people in ways that we never could before. So each of these tiny changes that we make, and when we're designing with massive personalization systems or massive ways that we can actually kind of reach people across the globe instantly, the effects are amplified to a level that we've never seen before. I think actually we're able to make changes to the world that we live in much quicker than any people before us, because we have that reach and we have that global impact. And for me, it's really important that we actually kind of consider where that actually starts to go. And I think it's not just the design community that's starting to pick up on it. There's an original talk that I did actually on the ethics of AI, and I was very comfortable talking about that, and then I suddenly realized, hang on a minute, I'm a designer and I don't think all the time about design ethics, but I was very comfortable talking about it in another practice and saying, oh, you know, we've got to be careful, these are things that we need to watch out for, we must design in this way, we must make sure it doesn't do that thing. So actually, this is the reason that this came about, is me thinking, actually, what is it that has held me has made me feel positive about the work that I do? And I'm very gut driven about work. If I enjoy something, I will go all out. And if I don't, people who know me well know that I will just say no and move on. And that's fine for me. And actually, so some of this talk is a little bit of an exploration of what is it that makes it up for me. And I hope that it will give kind of other people some thoughts to think about as well, as to what actually does that mean for you to be ethically designing, and does that make you happy or not? And so with those implications of tech, we've ended up lonelier, less satisfied and less productive. I don't know, you've probably all got your phones in your pocket or in your hands, but we actually tend to work now more than we ever did before. So we've automated loads of things and made it much easier, but we're also always on, we're always contactable. And I don't know about you, but my last office had WhatsApp groups for work. I don't know, anyone else have those for projects? Yeah, they're really annoying, because that's a channel that you think is supposed to be about your friends and about social stuff, and it was about work. So, you know, that was great. So anyway, just a little rant there. And what's important about the pace at which we're moving is that it's amazing, but actually our ability to innovate in things is far outpacing our ability to regulate them and actually understand those implications. So I think in all the public scandals that have happened, I won't pick on any companies in particular, but we see them time and time again. They're more publicized, they're more public, and actually we don't have the tools to deal with them. And for me, as designers, we're on that front line. We're there when those decisions are being made in the first place, and maybe we can try and change those things from happening before they happen. And hopefully there's more momentum now for us to kind of do that, because we can point at these things and say, hey guys, we probably don't want to be that company, because that would be pretty awkward. So how do we actually design ethically? And for me, it's these two kind of viewpoints. So human-centered, I think, is very much about user-centered design. It's those practices that we're all kind of very familiar with. We advocate for users, we try and make the best things possible for them, we try and solve their problem. But we tend to always be looking at a small niche, or those early adopters, or those people who are our fans, or how do we grow that user base? We don't tend to be looking actually at wider society and what's happening, what would happen. And this is the bit where it's really awkward, because it's like, what happens if you're really successful and everyone uses your thing? What does that mean for the world? Does that mean that because you focused on one group of people, that other groups of people have been left out? Not because you didn't think about them in a sort of like you excluded them way, just because that wasn't the target at the beginning. And actually your success spiraled and suddenly you were like amazing and everyone had you in their pockets and it was wonderful. But you know, what does that mean? I think it's almost, when we're talking about these sorts of things, you end up in the sort of sci-fi realm, which I love, but it's about understanding and being able to almost say, okay, would I build a dystopia or would I build a utopia if that happened? And actually, what do I want to do about it and how do I want to tackle that going forwards? And I'm not suggesting that we stop being user-focused. In fact, I think that's one of the most important things that we can do. I'm more suggesting that we actually just spend a couple of minutes just saying, what happens if we are that thing that takes over the world? What's the world like then? What's actually those kind of implications? And we do things like the Futures Wheel or disaster planning and actually start to bring in those more, you know, what if questions rather than like, how might we solve this problem that we've got? And this is where it hits kind of and I think this is articulated really well. Future Ethics is an amazing book that you should read if you're kind of interested in this world. But as designers who want to achieve things for a business, we have targets put on us. And actually, there are really easy ways to hit those targets that we know are going to work. We know so much about the people using our things. We've learned all about them. So we know the tricks to use to actually get them to do the things that we've been asked to achieve for the business. What we need to consider is actually, is that the right way to do it? Because there are lots of ways to solve those problems. And actually, the fastest way is not necessarily the best way for the people kind of in the long run and when it's been amplified across a large set of people. And it's actually just being kind of mindful about it and saying, you know, is this the right one, or do we keep trying to go and see what happens next? So to kind of focus on the two areas and the two sort of levels, there are three key things to do. So the first is to design for respect, and that's actually respecting human values and respecting humanity as a whole. The second is to design for transparency, and I think this one's more and more important. We see it regularly kind of coming up that people don't know how systems are used, so they seem kind of unable to release themselves from them. And designing mindfully, and that's actually about giving yourself that time to consider what's happening and how to do it. So I'll go through each one and show you a couple of examples of people that I think in a small way are doing some of these elements. So the first one is about designing for respect. This is a pyramid that some of you might be familiar with. It's from a company called Indie.ie. They have a really good they've been talking about this for ages. I think I met them at an open source conference like 10 years ago, and they were already starting to campaign actually for ethical design means that it is decentralized and open, and actually we're trying to go open source as much as possible, but we're protecting people's privacy as well, and actually making sure that what we're doing doesn't endanger human rights, whether that's at a value level or actually human rights in terms of human rights abuses. The second level is about respecting human effort and the level of effort that you're asking someone to put in when they use your system or use your product. And actually, obviously, we kind of go for making it as easy as possible. Sometimes I don't think that's always the best way. Some things should be difficult. And then the top of it is about making those delightful experiences and making human experience better for everyone, or for as many people as you possibly can. This is another one that's quite a good tool to use, which is called Ethics for Designers, and this is the moral value map. So this kind of gives you a few different values that are kind of intrinsic to us as people. And actually, if the work that you're doing infringes on any of these, it may mean that you're kind of impacting people in a negative way. And or actually in a positive way as well. And it's not to say, you know, don't do this because it impacts that. It's just be kind of mindful of it and actually understand what value that you have to them. And this is more about the future of work. And obviously, as this talk started off life being about AI and how we partner with machines, I think this is really important when we're designing systems and we are using personalization or machine learning or automation to any extent, that we're actually looking to build with humans, and it's actually human and machine together as a system rather than each working alone and one taking away from another. And actually, how do you make it so they are this sort of cross-bred centaur system rather than something that is kind of autonomous and alone? And this is one of my favorite examples of that, of actually human and machine working together. This guy is an avid runner. He built himself a machine robot thingy who's super friendly looking, and he feeds him tomatoes as he runs. And they kind of like run along together, and separately, like, this is no use to anyone else. This is very specific, but I think this is a really fun example of a centaur system. Actually, like, he can run further and for longer, and he's having fun doing it, and the robot's helping him do it. And I think it's about that, about building these things that are helping us kind of as we go. So secondly, designing for transparency, and to implement it fully means that you need to make sure that people understand how a system works and those underlying things. And the risk, if you don't, is that people just believe technology is magic. I think we're all kind of a little bit guilty of that. Even when we design with sort of new technologies, we don't necessarily know exactly how they work. It's kind of enough to know that they do work. But actually, we're asking people to put a lot of belief in something. And if something goes wrong, particularly if we're looking at sort of black box systems or machine learning type technologies, we don't know why it went wrong. So actually it's magic to even the people who've kind of been working on it. So who's actually doing it well? What's the positive side? So Everlane do it in terms of their supply chain and actually telling you exactly how much you're paying for a garment because of what went into it. So this is transparency at the level all the way down to actually why am I paying this cost for a garment? So you can see where that split is. And then TransferWise obviously is built on the idea that exchange rates with fees on them are actually unfair. So that's a business model built off transparency at the beginning and saying, you know, people don't like that. People don't like a hidden fee. And actually, what can we kind of do about it? And then these are some that are obviously a little bit not always known for doing the best, but there are some good bits in there. So I like the way that sort of Netflix is telling me why something is that 95% match, or if it's recommendations for my home, I've now got a lot of those steel straws for reusable straws, which is obviously trending everywhere. And my phone told me that I probably want to lower my fitness goals because I really wasn't achieving them. So it did it in kind of a nice way, so I'm all right with that. But, you know, it was telling me, you know, you're not doing it. So rather than just say red alert, you might want to change it up a bit. And, you know, there are all sorts of examples of this. But anything that we can do to actually explain why a system is saying something and what the context behind it is very important. And actually, it's almost that thing where we tend to work with minimum transparency because we don't think of it necessarily as our job, or, you know, interface copy quite often falls down to someone else. But actually explaining those things or making the system in a way that people do understand what's going on is really important. And we need to kind of be much more conscious about it as we're doing our work. And then lastly, I've rattled through, so you get to get Johnny back up here and ask Q&A as well, is designing mindfully. And this is something that I feel awkward about. Awkward's not the right word. It makes me uncomfortable sometimes because when we're going through design, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to achieve these goals. And they might be set by an essential need that we know that people have, or they could actually be from the business and actually saying, you know, we don't want those barriers to purchase. We want to make sure that people are getting through the checkout. Why aren't they getting through? We need to make it frictionless. But actually sometimes that means that we're removing choices from people because we're making those steps so easy that people aren't taking the cognitive effort to actually understand what you've agreed to. Like if you think about the cookie messages that you get, you just dismiss them. You didn't really read it. There's a load of copy on there because there has to be. But actually it's just like, just go away, and then you don't know what you agreed to. And it's those sort of things that actually, it's fairly frictionless to get rid of it, but did we remove the choice from people? Actually the understanding of what the implication of that decision was. And I recently went freelance again because I started to feel uncomfortable about some of the projects that I was working on. And so I wanted to have a bit more control over this. So this is kind of the checklist that I use when I'm considering stuff now. So number one is, who is the project for? So how do I feel about that company? Do I think they are trying to make the world better in whatever way it is? It doesn't necessarily have to be like very worthy. It could just be that they're sort of like positively inputting in some way. What is the project that they want to do? So it doesn't have to be that the client is perfect in the first place. They actually might not be someone that I thought was that great. But if the project is something that means that you have a chance to affect change and make the world a little bit better, that's really good. That kind of gets a tick. And the thing about, can you actually create the positive impact? Does there seem to be a business appetite for hearing those things and actually considering the impact that they will have above profit lines? And I think that's really important because quite often we'll work on stuff and it's like amazing and so exciting, and then someone will be like, yeah, but we need to upsell. You're like, okay, all right. And it's not necessarily always the best thing to upsell. And then the last one, which is because, you know, I'm very driven by that emotional impact of things on me, is how do you feel? And actually, I think we ignore it a lot and we're very rational. And I think that a lot of the stuff that Johnny was saying earlier actually about sort of designing your design career, I think a lot of it's about feeling. And do you feel comfortable? Do you feel happy? And do you feel like you can grow? That's so important. And, you know, you can get negatives in, I probably think, 2 out of 4, but if you've got more than 2 negatives, probably not a good, for me, it's not a good option. And it really does need to become just part of your design work and just part of the thing that you're doing, and actually saying, we are going to consider this, and it is going to be just part of the work that we do as a team. And if we don't acknowledge the responsibilities that we have as designers and as people with this level of privilege, that we can impact, sometimes with some products, the whole world. Actually, that makes me really uncomfortable, and I hope that it makes other people here uncomfortable too. Because I think that we do really need to actually start taking that responsibility now before we get another tech crisis. So yeah, stop, think, consider, and then design. Actually give yourself the space to be mindful about design and not always rushing it out and not always going for the deadlines. So that's kind of the 3 key areas. So I'm always awful at the ending. But if you have any questions, that's kind of my viewpoint on ethics. I am not dreadfully dry and boring. I am fun. Ethics is also fun. Come talk to me about it.